The Roundhouse is an incredible, iconic building of North London. It's actually built in 1846 as an engine maintenance shed, one of the first and the best surviving in the country. It was new technology of the day, and I've got a plan in my office from 1854, only 8 years later, showing the conversion of the Roundhouse from a steam engine shed into a bonded warehouse for wines, gins and spirits. So the reason why it survives today is really because it was a warehouse. But thankfully, Arnold Wesker, the playwright, now Sir Arnold Wesker, got hold of the end of a lease of the building in the early 60s and turned it into something called Centre 42. And the first event that actually happened here was on the 15th of October 1966, when a young local band performed, and it was their first major gig, and they were called Pink Floyd. It was freezing cold, it was rat infested, it was disgustingly dirty. It was probably an awful experience, but things got slightly better. But when I first arrived here in 1999, there was only about 6 lights in the building and the roof was still thin and it was really not accessible at all. What we needed to do was completely transform the building into what it is now, and that is to build the creative centre downstairs, which is called the Roundhouse Studios, and this amazing performance space upstairs, with all the facilities that a contemporary audience needs. In fact, we wanted to transcend physical accessibility by miles. You know, it's got to become psychologically accessible, both in terms of how you feel about it, through its programme, through what it does, but also that you can see into it, and you don't have to have some degree in modern art to get into it. You know, it's a totally democratic feel to the space.
The reason I come to the Roundhouse is because I don't really have a studio set up at home. So I come here to get most of my compositions and stuff done. It's a really cool place to hang out with friends and people that you know.
It's very important for us at the Roundhouse, at me at executive level and the board level, that we work with people who knew what they're doing. So the architects obviously did. We had access consultants, David Bonnet Associates, and also we recruited an advisory board of people with lots of different abilities. We could then have those people's experiences and their expertise coming through the building and making it feel like it's a place for all people.
And so the people who took on this building with a vision of change then engaged in a process of how could this building engage with a wider audience, with a wider range of people. And so bit by bit, as a designer, one would start looking at the new obligations that this building is being exposed to and parading those and saying, can you reconcile all of them one with the other? And often the answer is no, and that's where, on the access side, my work begins. The architect has to understand the ambitions of the person who owns the building and what it is they expect, and then you expose this building to a whole range of demands because the public are going to use it, and there are many people who represent the interests of the public. And we're used to that. What architects are not used to is their propositions being tested, as it were, by users. Now, I think one of the extraordinary things about so-called access groups is, in the end, they're people who have particular requirements, but they are a testing mechanism at a very early stage for the architect to say, well, look, this is what we're planning here. What do you think? And if you can get a constructive dialogue going there, the architect benefits hugely from that exposure, because problems may emerge that would simply not have been thought about before. And so everybody should be thanked for actually speeding up the process of design rather than slowing it down. So instead of seeing it as a negative obstacle, it should be seen as a God-sent opportunity, quite honestly, to looking at how that design develops. And I think this is wholly new, and it's something to be welcomed. And for the moment, the subject is a bit devoted to disabled people, but it's broadening out to include older people, parents with children, and all the rest of it, as we know. And so the subject is growing up to be called inclusive design.
There's a spectrum of consultation. At one end of it you have what I would call cosmetic consultation, almost self-explanatory. And that cosmetic consultation, imagine a room full of random disabled people who aren't quite sure why they're there, and a bunch of rather well-dressed people in suits and things then comes into that room, makes a presentation to them, then says, do you like what we presented to you? Doesn't write down anything in what the disabled people then say, then walks away and leaves them. That is cosmetic consultation, box ticking. At the other end of the spectrum is what I would describe as empowered consultation. What you need is for the client to place an obligation on the architects and designers, not just to consult with the disabled consultation group, but to implement whatever is agreed between the architects and the disabled consultation group. And what then happens is that the input of that consultation group becomes useful. What you really need is disabled people with some experience of whatever the function of the building is and its operation. And that's going to save you an awful lot of time. Now, also, if you can find disabled people who have had previous experience of being consultants, of being consulted, that's going to be to your advantage as well, because they're going to be able to understand perhaps drawings and, for instance, things like Part M regulations and the effect that will have on your design. It's well worth putting the time and the energy and the effort into identifying those people and recruiting them.
The role of the access consultants, it helps not only to be advocates and give voice to people who have been disappointed by the built environment in the past, but on the other hand, the access consultant has to be aware of the building and the person who's responsible, trying to hold together the finances for the project and contain costs. You need approvals for buildings as well, which means engaging with people who want to put signs up everywhere and fire officers and so on. And you have to have the wisdom of Solomon, quite honestly, in order to reconcile these various aspirations that may be in conflict with one another. And it's one of the delights of the job. But it's not simply that. You've also got the underpinning of all of that is having an almost forensic knowledge of the building itself, because knowledge is the fount of this. And so with the Roundhouse, for example, I pored over plans over a long period of time, understanding this building, its limitations and its opportunities. And you've got to be almost as good as the architect in knowing the building. And that's where I think your influence lies in the end.
There are, in fact, many features which are highly specialised, which the Roundhouse was advised on. I think the feature of which I'm proudest is that at one level in the circular building, there is what I call colour-coded orientation guidance, so that once you had become accustomed to the building, you would know where you were by the colour that was nearest to you.